Yeah, because it's so beautiful and we probably won't get so many days like this in the winter. All right, going back to chapter 6. Just a minute. Okay. Yes, you could have the text. Oh, it's right in here. Oh, last time I asked, you said you didn't want it. 1 second, guys. My mistake. The last time I asked you, Ellen, you said you didn't want it. Maybe I misunderstood that. Sure, happy to give you. There you go. Misunderstanding. Okay. So it is Proverbs, Lamentation, Esther. We're on chapter 6. That's 8. All right. Okay. Ruby's happy now. She has in front of her the text. We are on chapter 6. Okay. Yeah. Chapter 6. So I want to remind people what chapter 6 is all about. Haman had, remember at the end of last chapter 5, Zeresh, his wife, gives Haman the idea that he'll build a 50-meter, 50-something high, cubit, 50 cubits high. It's about a meter, maybe? Not sure. No, it's more about a foot or a foot and a half. The tree to hang Mordechai. That makes him feel good, and he's rushing immediately to the king, even in the middle of the night, to give him this idea that he should hang Mordechai because he's so angry that Mordechai sits and does not stand and give him the honor that he feels he deserves when he walks by, and that was the edict of the king as well. So he comes, and before he even gets a chance to speak, that was the night that King Ahasuerus's sleep was disturbed, or he woke up and he couldn't fall asleep. And we spoke about the fact that he was very perturbed and he was imagining all sorts of things. People remember between Esther and Haman. Why is he imagining that? Anybody remember? Why is he imagining about Esther and Haman? It's not a trick question. When is this happening the night in between? Anybody remember? It's happening in between the first party that Esther makes and the second party. She already had one party. She only invites 2 guests, Ahasuerus and Haman. Haman is second only to the king. And now she says, you know what? The king says, what can I offer you? Up to half my kingdom. Because, let's say, it's because he's so in love with her. And she says, you know what? I'm actually just going to do one more thing. Let me invite you again to this wonderful party tomorrow night or tomorrow, whatever. And you and Haman. And Ahasuerus is now in between those 2 times. So I imagine that especially a king who always feels threatened, especially then, maybe today as well, I don't know, always threatened and thinking that people want to take his throne, people want to usurp him, people are plotting against him. Remember, they had tasters. What do they call the people who tasted them things for poison? Special royal tasters to make sure that he wasn't poisoned. I'm not saying that specifically about Ahasuerus. I'm just talking in general about royalty. So he's imagining all these things about Esther and Haman, because why else is Esther inviting Haman? Does that make sense to people? That he's worried? I mean, that makes sense to me. And he's worried that maybe they're having an affair. That was one option. And they're plotting to somehow overthrow him. He's very nervous. And then he said to himself, we discussed this last time, that, well, if they really are having an affair or they're plotting something, somebody should have told me. How could it be that nobody knows that, and nobody told me? He said, well, maybe people have told me something in the past and I never rewarded them. And he says, you know what? Let's bring out the book. Everything's written in the book. Let's see if people told me things in the past I didn't reward them. And oh, lo and behold, when the scribe opens up the book, it opens up exactly to the story of Mordechai. When Mordechai, in the first chapter or the second chapter, when he overhears Bigtan and Teresh plotting to kill the king, and he tells the king, and the king says, where was he rewarded? He was never rewarded. All right? Everybody with me on that until here? And then he hears noises outside or something, and he asks who's there, and the Na'arei HaMelech, the pages, I would call them, the pages of the king, because a Na'ar is a youth, so I imagine these might be his pages, say, Hine Haman. Haman is the one waiting outside. Now, he already has these ideas about Haman, that maybe Haman is trying to do something to him. He says, perfect guy. I'm going to set him up to do something to honor Mordechai. That's more or less what we got to. Now, why did Haman come? He came, as it says in verse 4, he came to the court, the outside court of the king. Remember, there were different courts. You have to get past the guards to get in. Petitioned the king to hang Mordechai on the gallows that he had prepared. And the king now invites him in. So now the king is going to be a little, what's the word, devious, but it's not the word I'm looking for. He's not saying everything. What would you call that? It's like he's being secretive, I guess, but there's another word, devious, secretive, something like that, in orders that Haman won't exactly know what he means. And the first, what does he ask? He says, oh, Haman, that's awesome. I have a question for you. Perfect timing. You're just the guy I wanted to ask that. And he says in verse 6, so Haman comes in, and Vayomer lo HaMelech, the king says to him, Ma lasot, what should we do? Ba'ish asher HaMelech hapetz biko. And an ish, and remember last time we said there were two people in the Megillah who were called ish, or man. One of them is Haman, and one of them is Mordechai. So Haman, in his own thoughts, is thinking, oh, the king obviously wants to honor me, because he says, what should we do about someone who the king decides to honor or to give esteem to? And Haman says in his heart, well, who else could the king want to give esteem to except for me? You know, he's very self-centered and narcissistic and believes in his own power. Okay, and we got there. That's verse 6. Everybody with me on that? Okay, let me see 1 second. So we said called a man, but there is a question. I'm going to ask the group here, why do you think Ahasuerus didn't say from the beginning, why didn't he say from the beginning, what should we do to honor Mordechai? Why do you think he said it in this oblique way? What should we do to a man who we think should be honored and give esteem to? Any thoughts about that?
Maybe he knew what Haman's response would be if he made it more specific.
Oh, does everybody hear Ruby saying maybe Ahasuerus understood that Haman hates Mordechai, even though he hasn't said that to him yet?
But they're still in contention of some sort.
No, they're in contention. He hasn't said it to Ahasuerus. Is Ahasuerus able to put 2 and 2 together when he says there is a nation? He hasn't even said who the nation is. He just said there's a nation that is scattered. He hasn't said it's Mordechai. He hasn't said anything yet, at least in the text of the Megillah, he hasn't said it. But Ruby is saying maybe it's not even about Mordechai. Maybe in general, whoever he wanted to honor, he wants to hear what Haman would say if it was about himself, knowing that Haman was self-centered, and he'd get a real answer out of Mordechai, even without knowing it was Mordechai. Maybe. Right, but either way, I think it works, because if he knew it was Mordechai, I don't know. Did the king know that Mordechai didn't bow down to Haman? I don't know. Like, did that reach the king's ears? The king doesn't, if the king came, Mordechai would bow down. So if the king was walking with Haman, Mordechai would have bowed down. Who knows if he knew that story? We don't know. But it is a good point that Ruby's making, that if he had said, I'm honoring X, then I would imagine Haman would have had a different response. I think that's a really good point. Whether he's not mentioning Mordechai or whether he's not mentioning anybody's name. I think that was a very good point. Okay. Yeah, Robert.
Well, like other things in which we see the king speaking, he speaks of universal and general decrees, like send the decree throughout all the 128 provinces.
27, yep.
So 227. So he says here, what should be done to the man who the king wants to honor? he wants to set up a general proclamation, not specifically at
Oh,
Mordecai.
oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting, Robert. I never
it,
thought of that.
it could stand for all times.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing. I've never heard that suggested. That's really brilliant. An idea for all times. Beautiful, beautiful about how to honor. I really like that. But of course, yeah, maybe he's setting it up that way, like whatever we do now, that's what we're going to do in the future. That's an interesting point, no, Ruby? That maybe that's the way the king is setting it up. Hi, Nathan. And immediately, like there's, in other words, from the question of the king, it could be, I think this is what Robert is saying, it could be from the question of the king that he's talking about a very specific man. But maybe Robert is saying, he's just saying, what should we do? I was thinking about it. I want to sometimes honor someone who does something special. What do you think we should do to honor? I think that's a really nice read of that. But Haman, in any case, now he does know who he wants to honor. But given what I said before, that maybe the king had these paranoid thoughts and was worried that he hadn't honored that person, it makes sense. It could flow from there. What Robert is saying, well, if in general I haven't honored X, let me have something in place so that anytime somebody does something, I could offer them this honor. I think that's great. I think that's a great and very logical response. I mean, they all stand because we don't have an answer, a specific answer, but I like it when there's logic to it, and I think that makes a lot of sense to me as well. But Haman, of course, what does he say in his heart? Oh, he's talking about me. Couldn't be anybody else. Must be me. Okay, that was great. Thank you both for your answers. That was great. Let's move on to verse 8. Let me just see if there's anything else on verse 7. No. Okay. So what does Haman say? So he started it in verse 7 saying, a man who the king wishes to honor or show esteem, what should they do? Yaviu levush malchut. We did start talking about this, but I'm going to repeat it. They will bring royal garments, asher lavash bo hamelech, which the king wore. So we understand it as this is what the king wore in his coronation. But, maybe any of the king's garments would be fancy. Like, I don't know if it has to be specifically about his coronation. Everybody with me on that? Which the king wore. Visus and the horse, asher achav alav hamelech, which the king rode on. No, sorry, it is about the coronation. It's right here. It's right here in the pshat, sorry. Vasher nitan keter malchut berosho. So the day when the king, when he was coronated, meaning keter malchut is the crown of royalty. So when the crown of royalty was put on his head, i.e. in the coronation, he had specific garments, he rode on a specific horse. So that's setting it up in verse 8, which we'll have here in a second. And then in verse 9 he says, V'naton halavush v'asus, and this garment and the horse would be given by one of the king's ministers, v'hilbishu et ish, and they themselves will dress the man asher hamelech hafetz bikaro, that the king wishes to honor, v'yirkivu, and they will make him ride, or they will lead him riding, or they'll place him on the sus, on the horse, berachov ha'ir, in the streets of the city. V'kar'u irkivu, I guess means to ride. How do you say that in English? Parade him on the horse. That makes sense. Parade him on the horse in the city square, it says in English, because that would be Rehov Ha'ir, the main street, like Main Street. Let's call it Main Street in the city. And they will call in front of him, Kacha yaseh laish, asher hamelech hafetz bikaro. This shall be done to the man who the king desires to honor. Okay, so this is the picture that he paints of how to honor. Now, what is the king here? We did speak about this a little bit, but that's okay. Okay. So first of all, I told you that one of the commentaries said that the keter, the crown, was on the horse, and they did use to crown horses as well. So maybe he meant put the crown on the horse, not necessarily the crown on the man, but the horse should be crowned as he or he or she, I don't know if it's boy horses or girl horses, stallions or mares, who he rode on, usually stallions, I guess. So that could be, but in any case, it's going to recreate the day of the coronation. So according to the Medrash, when he said crown, this is what I said last time, Achashverosh's face dropped or got very red. Because when he says Keter Malchut, given his thoughts originally that Esther and Haman are in cahoots, perhaps having an affair, he's like, oh, he even wants the crown. Like, when do you ever put the crown of the king on somebody's head? I mean, it's one thing to put on the clothing and ride him on the horse, parade him on the horse, got it. But what's this about using the crown? So here, so interesting. If we look, and where did they get that from? Look at verse 10 with me. Vayoma hamelech le'aman. Maher, by the way, the trop on maher, which means go quickly, do it quickly, is maher, maher, right? The trop on it, the way you sing it is like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Kach et halevush ve'et hasus. Take the garments and take the horse. Kasher dibarta, as you said. Does the king say anything about the crown? He doesn't say anything about the crown, which is what led the midrash or the commentary to say he didn't like the whole business with the crown. The crown was and I never noticed that until I learned it in depth. I didn't notice that Haman said the crown, but the king never repeated the crown. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes you have to look really, really carefully, and that's what we're learning is be'iyun in detail, like really taking it apart piece by piece. So he says, quickly, 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 take the garments, take the horse, kasher dibarta, as you said, ba'asachen, and do it, you do it, leMordechai hayudi, to Mordechai the Jew, hayoshev b'shar hamelech. So hayoshev, who is sitting, the king knew maybe exactly what word to use. Because what is it that makes Haman more angry than anything else? That Mordechai sits and doesn't rise when he comes along. So you could say he's sitting in the gates of the king, so that's the king's gate, so that's just means that's where he sits. But it could mean he sits, he doesn't get up for you. I get it. I know about that, Haman. Don't think I don't know what's going on here. And that would go to what Ruby said, that he did know exactly what Haman felt about Mordechai, and he was trying to kind of goad him or, press on the sore spot. Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. Do not let one thing drop, meaning don't leave out anything that you said. Now, if he says don't leave out anything that you said, that actually means he's putting the crown back in. Because Haman said clothing, horse, crown. Even if Achashverosh said clothing and horse. So the Medrash also says that Haman was very perceptive and saw that when he used the word keter, what's a keter? What's a keter? Felice, you know.
Crown.
Crown. That when he used the word keter malchut, when he did the royal crown, he saw that Achashverosh's face got angry. So when he now goes to do it, it's so interesting in verse 11, he took the garments and the horse, and he dressed Mordechai, and he paraded him in the streets of the city or the town square. But according to the Midrash, Achashverosh had said to him, don't leave out anything that you said, meaning he did put the crown on. So it's just an interesting back and forth, but the idea behind this is that it created more turmoil and paranoia in Achashverosh's brain. And that's the way he's coming to the second party. Okay, just setting the scene here. Like, what I like is that we're getting into the psyche and what's actually going on inside people's heads. We're not just reading the text of the Megillah. Vayikra lefanav, and he called before him, Kacha yaseh la'ish, asher hamelech chafetz bikaro. This is what should be done to the man who the king wishes to honor. Okay. All right, now we're going to go inside because I did a few psukim together. So this is on verse 10. Remember what I said, maher, maher, quick. Okay, so one of the Parshanut says this, one of the commentaries. Okay, the Targum Sheni, hold on one second. Okay, the Targum Sheni is which we discussed last time, is a translation into Aramaic. Targum means translation, Sheni, I don't know why it's called Sheni, maybe there was an original one. Or there is a different Targum, Onkelos, and others that translate, and Targum Jonathan, whoever that was. They translate into Aramaic because that was the spoken language of the time, just like we do English. But remember what we said was that anytime you have a translation, it's also a commentary, because you have to choose how to translate it. The same way I could have chosen 5 different ways, saying esteem, saying honors, right? You could always do it different ways. Do not leave out anything. So the Targum Sheni writes that he instructed him to go to his treasuries, retrieve the golden crown, which was brought to him from wherever, that he wore on the first day. And when Esther saw Mordechai, I don't know if you know this song that in Samuel, that there's a song, there's a prophecy. Mikimi, 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 Mikimi. People know that song? Mikimi, Mikimi, Meya Fardal. Mikimi, Mikimi, Meya Fardal. Okay, that's the reason that verse was put to song, is because it says that we will be raised up, Me'afardal, from poor dirt or from ashes. Me'ashpot yarim evion. Evion is a literally poor person or somebody who's suffering. Me'ashpot means from the trash, basically. Ashpa is trash in his real garbage can. Me'ashpot yarim evion will be raised up. Lahoshivi im nidivim, to sit with the nobles and endow them with honor. So that's not an exact quote, but that's where it comes from Samuel. That's the Shmuel. So Esther, it's really a beautiful thing, which we haven't heard till now, that Esther was very Jewish, had a wonderful Jewish education from her uncle, it seems, who was Mordechai, and she knew Torah. She knew the Torah, she knew Tehillim, Psalms. This is after David HaMelech lived, and after Shmuel, I think, it's between, it's after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the first one. So it's way after David lived, because it was his son who built the Beit HaMikdash. And so she witnesses and she says, maybe we're beginning to feel the turning point here in the Megillah. She's seeing a prophecy come true. Halavai, that we would see prophecies like this come true today. In Israel, I'm talking about. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay, hold on one second. I want to. He issued an. Okay. Why did he do it quickly? Remember I said maher. So there's an answer here that. Why did he do it quickly? I'm just trying to think if this adds something. I think that the reason he said it quickly is because he was so worried that somebody knew about this plot but didn't come to reveal it to him. And he knew that in a few hours he'd be having a second banquet with Esther and with Haman. And he thinks somebody might, so if right now, in the middle of the night or just as dawn was breaking, Haman parades Mordechai around and the king honors him. Maybe somebody said, why is he honoring him? And the scribe or somebody else say, well, that's because a while ago he revealed a plot against the king, and so the king wants to honor him. Maybe that would bring somebody forward to say, to reveal the plot against him by Esther and Haman. Remember, this is all going on in the king's head. Because the maher, the quick would be to quickly fit this in before the banquet happens, so he would have more information. This goes along with his worrying and being anxious and believing that Esther and Haman. So this makes sense according to the text. Esther is inviting just Haman and the king to the banquet. Then she invites them a second time. In between the two, his brain is going and saying, why? Why is she doing it? Why is this queen who I love, who I raised up, why is she inviting on to us? It must be that Haman and she are in cahoots, maybe even having an affair. Then he hears that Haman thinks it's about him. He can see it on Haman's face. And he says, we should honor him by making him be instead of the king, by having the crown and the clothing and the horse. And this is all after he thought somebody should have told me that they're in cahoots with each other. It seems like I must have not honored someone. So quick, let me honor Mordechai so people, whoever knows about this plot against me, will come forth before the banquet. Everybody get that? The logic of one piece after the other? Did that make sense? I'm not seeing much yeses. We could, somebody give me a thumbs up or? No, Robert, is that confusing?
It's an interesting new thought, but yeah, it kind of makes sense. It makes emotional sense.
Right, because then then they'd be rewarded. If that person came forward and told the king, Haman and Esther, they've been sleeping together and they want to remove you, then they'll be rewarded because they see Mordechai was rewarded. That was the idea according to this thought, this line of thought. Because they see the reward, they'll be rewarded, they'll be given honor. Anybody who's given honor like that, I assume, would be given a lot of respect and dignity and honor by other people. Okay, let's move on from there. The next thing is, so why do you think Haman agreed to this plan? I mean, he hated Mordechai. Any thoughts about that? Why did he agree to the plan?
Well, in the palace intrigue, at some point, as you just described immediately before, Haman might have wanted himself to become the king of the land.
Yeah.
So being told that he has to parade Mordecai around, he better well do it, or else he's going to reveal his ambition to replace.
Nice.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yep. He better say, oh, yeah, sure, I'm willing to do that. Whatever you say, king. Right? Like that? Cool. So there's a midrash that says that Haman tried to barter many things with the king. That's a midrash that says that because the midrash can't imagine that Haman, who hated Mordechai so much, would be willing to parade him around. So he says, I'll give you money. Remember at the beginning, he offered him 10,000 pieces of silver. He says, remember, you never took that from me. I'm willing to give it to you, just don't give Mordechai the honor. And the king's like, no, I'll take your money, but I'm still giving Mordechai the honor. And then he says, I'll offer you my, again, according to the Midrash, I'll offer you my children as slaves. And the king says, I'm happy to take them, but we're still giving the honor. And he says his wife, even his own life, according to the Midrash. Midrashim are often very exaggerated, but maybe it's true. I'll even be willing for you to kill me. I just can't imagine giving Mordechai the honor. And the last thing that he offered the king was to rescind the decree of killing the Jews. That was more important to him. That was the last thing he was willing to offer to rescind it, even after his own life, according to the Medrash. According to the Medrash. And according to the person who said it, said, this is a hardcore anti-Semite. Hardcore anti-Semite. Somebody who will be willing to give up his life as long as the Jews get killed. That felt harsh. By the way, I just read something somewhere on Facebook, somebody, I don't remember his name, or somewhere on the internet, where he said, get it through your heads, Jews. It's always the Jews' fault. Doesn't matter what you do. I will always blame the Jews. The Jews are always at fault. It was really hard to read that. I hate the Jews, and that's never going to change. It's just, feels really hard. Okay. Okay, there's another, oh wait, let's go to the next one. Wait, we said that, 11. He took the levush, he took the raiments, the clothing, he took the sus, the horse, and he dressed him. The Gemara in Megillah says Haman was sent at night to get Mordechai, right? It's the middle of the night. But the parade was only in the morning. Why? Because otherwise people wouldn't see it. People aren't walking around. The parade, I'm talking about parading Mordechai. Where was Mordechai? He was sitting b'shar HaMelech. He was sitting in the gates of the king. What was he doing? He was learning. He was learning Gemara with his buddies, his sages buddies. When he saw Haman coming, he said, that's it. The genocide is happening. It's going to happen, and he tells the sages to flee. He gives up, he's saying, I'm willing to. By the way, I don't know if you heard this story. There's an amazing, hard story about a family in one of the kibbutzim when they heard that that Hamas had infiltrated and were killing people. So the wife they were married like 75 years. They had They had built the kibbutz, or whatever, 50 years, whatever it was, 60. They had built the kibbutz from ground up. And the wife had an aide, and their children or their daughter and grandchildren were right next door or in the back of the house somewhere. And the grandfather said to the wife and the aide and the children, who actually might have even been sleeping, you stay in the safe room. I'll just sit out here. I'll tell them. I'll fend them off. And they did it. But what they understood afterwards was that he was killed, but they never checked the rest of the house. And they understood that he was willing to sacrifice his own life, knowing that if they saw him just sitting there, they would assume that he was an old man who had no family and who couldn't get to the safe room. And that over the course of the day, the terrorists kept going back and forth to the different houses. They kept going in, they saw him killed in the chair, and each time they didn't check the safe room and they didn't check the other places in the house. And that was what he did. That's somebody who gave his own life in order to protect his families. He said, like they were thinking, I mean, he didn't write this anywhere, but he had a long life and he was willing, he wanted his family to continue. It's really an amazing thing. So that's what it made me think of when I heard the Medrash that Mordechai told the sages to flee, and he prays to God. Haman comes over and says, what were you doing with your hands? Because he was learning something about kmitza, taking a little pinchful of, it's something to do with offerings, with sacrifices. And Haman says, the king commanded me to dress you as a king and march you around the city. But Mordechai doesn't make it easy for Haman because he wants Haman to fail so that Haman will be punished, right? That's makes sense. I mean, that's where the Medrash comes from. So Mordechai says, you know what? I've been sitting here with sackcloth and ashes. Remember, they were fasting for 3 days. So, and he was wearing sackcloth and ashes. So he said, I need to clean myself. And he needs to go to a bathhouse. The bathhouses were locked because Esther locked them in order to make it hard for Haman to bathe Mordechai. They didn't have running water in the homes. And there were no attendants. The attendants were sent home. So he ended up literally bathing him and dressing him, again, according to the Medrash. And he was crying with embarrassment. The Targum Sheni, which we spoke about before, said the main center street in Shushan had 75,000 people in it that crossed this square, this town square. They were holding things like golden goblets in their hand, because remember, Shushan is this fancy city where the nobility, they hobnob with each other, and they had maybe a shofar or trumpets in the other. Mordechai is on the king's horse with the clothing that the king wore, and Mordechai, the Jew, is on the horse. I can imagine that this must have been confusing for people who didn't quite know which end was up, because they knew there was an edict about the Jews. So I can imagine that was strange. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but that was interesting to me to think about that. We're going to go to the next three psukim in a minute. I just want to give you, do you remember last time we spoke about that when it says Hamelech, the king, it refers to God, according to us. In other words, it refers to the king Achashverosh, but also to God. And when it says Hamelech Achashverosh, the king, it only refers to Achashverosh. So, it says here, remember what Haman says, Kacha ye'aseh la'ish, this is what should be done for the man, asher hamelech chafetz bikaro, who the king wants to honor. So according to this interpretation, for the Jews, it meant which king our God wanted to honor. So God, this is not seeing God's name in the Megillah, but seeing God's handiwork, that God made sure that Mordechai was honored. But of course, to the Persians, it was talking about Achashverosh, that Achashverosh wants honored. Everybody get that? The difference, the melech. So when we talked, Judy Stiglitz was on. She wasn't able to come today, but her idea was to go back to the beginning and see the melech and the melech Achashverosh. To learn the whole Megillah we talked about, and this is an example of how the Jews would see that it's God's hand, HaMelech, but all the people in Persia who didn't believe in God would say, oh no, this is the king Achashverosh who wants to honor him. Okay. Next, verse 12. Everybody good? Move on. Vayashav Mordechai Shar HaMelech. Mordechai returns, or he brought either Vayashav, I guess he himself returned Mordechai to the gates of the king. So here's an interesting thing. And it doesn't say Haman just went to his home. That's what it should have said, that Haman went to his home to prepare maybe for the party. Haman nitchaf el beito, was pushed, or dachuf means urgent, or was pushed hurriedly to his home. Avel, what's avel? To be an avel, a mourner. So he could be mourning the fact that he had to parade Mordechai around. V'chafui rosh, with his head covered. Covered with what? So one way of understanding it is, remember when this was a way they used to mourn, with sackcloth and ashes, and then putting like a hood or some sackcloth over their head and covering their face. So it could be he's in mourning. But here is where anybody heard of the midrash that Haman's daughter dumped some contents on his head? Anybody hear that? You familiar with that medrash? No, never heard it? Okay. There's a medrash that says that Haman's daughter was very excited and happy that her father was getting honored. I mean, she was waiting to hear that Haman would come home and say what? Remember why did he go to the king in order to tell him? He built a gallows. Remember that? 50 meters, 50 amot high. So she's waiting for him to come home and say, yep, we have permission. We can hang Mordechai. So what does she see? She thinks that Mordechai is going to be demeaned. And what does she see? So here's where Medrash steps in. That she sees somebody being dressed in the king's garment. It was impossible to see who that was because she's seeing it from her second floor, whatever it was. So she assumes it must be her father, Haman. And that Haman, in order for people not to recognize him, that he's the one pushing Mordechai or pulling Mordechai, he wears Mordechai's clothing, right? So people wouldn't recognize. He doesn't want to wear his clothing as the minister. It's embarrassing enough that he's doing it. So what does she see? She sees a Jew pulling somebody dressed in the king's clothing. What does she imagine? It's Mordechai leading Haman. That's what she imagines. And the next step will be, not enough that you demeaned him, now let's hang him. Right? That's what she sees. So what does she do? She takes the contents of a chamber pot, according to as kids we were told just the garbage. But according to the Medrash, it was the chamber pot, which is disgusting, obviously, and she dumps it on who she thinks is Mordechai's head, but actually it's her own father. And then when she sees that it's her father, according to the Medrash, she dies by suicide because she can't believe she did that. And that's why it says he's a vel, he's a mourner. He's a mourner because his daughter killed herself. A lot of Medrash over one word, avel. But the reason, why are Chachamim, our Midrashim, making all these Midrashim? We're just understanding the hatred, right? When we talked about anti-Semitism, there's so much anti-Semitism in the daughter. There's so much anti-Semitism in the father. That's how he raised them. Did you want to ask a question, Robert Moshe? No. That's how he raised them. That's, I think, the point of what they're trying to make here. That it is so ingrained in her. The whole thing with the honor and the dignity and hating the Jews, and she hated the Jews, and right? You don't put a chamber pot on people, right? That's disgusting no matter what. Okay, that comes from the avel, being an avel, being a mourner. All right. Okay, we don't need that. Oh, that's not important. Yeah, so the avel v'chafui rosh, so there's a quote from Jeremiah that when they're shamed and humiliated, they cover their heads. Now that makes sense. You don't want people to recognize you when you're humiliated, which is what Haman felt. So you could understand the chafui rosh, right? So we could understand it as being a mourner, but remember it's a medrash, and we could understand it as chafui rosh. He covers his head because he's so humiliated and embarrassed. Okay. Anything else? Verse 13. Vayisaper Haman lezeresh ishto. And Haman told everything that happened to Zeresh, his wife, ulchol ohavav, and all of his loved ones, his friends, et kol asher karo, everything that happened to him. So that's interesting. that he did that? What, according to this question, 1 second. Vayomer lo chachamav, and his wise people said to him. So the person here noticed that first it says he told his loved ones, but his sages answered him. Any thoughts about that? Why would he tell his loved ones, his friends, but his sages are the ones that answered him? Any thoughts? It's interesting, right? He told his friends and the sages answered. So I'm going to give you an answer that I saw here. It was the same people, but they gave a wise answer. And actually, one thing that I learned is that, which I thought was, I really took away with me, is that even though they're non-Jews, we can still give them credit for giving wise counsel. And I really like that, like a little point of hope, teeny point of hope in all of our learning, that it's okay to call them chachamim, because they were what now? They were wise. It is on the pasuk. Yeah, go on, Felice. You want to say something? Wait, unmute first. Unmute. Felice, unmute, please. You can't unmute?
Okay,
There.
it's okay now.
Okay.
No, because
Okay.
it says Vayomelo Hachamav V'Zeres Ishto, and also his wife.
Oh,
So
I
she was
understand that.
putting-
My question is about why is his ohavav, his friends, are referred to as chachamim? That was my question. I'm not taking away from Zeresh.
Oh, they both said it. That's what I was thinking. Okay,
Right, but the question was why.
what
Yeah.
they were
So I
Hachamav.
thought that was beautiful, that they had wise counsel. We're going to get to what the counsel is in a moment.
Mhm.
Okay. But then I actually want to address something that you said. So, but first I want to say, why, here's the question. What normal person would tell everyone of the embarrassment and humiliation he suffered? I thought that was a great question. Why is he telling them? I mean, on one hand, you could say, well, either he reeks of the chamber pot or they see how angry he is. He should have been happy. He should have been coming back. But did he have to tell all the details?
Well, maybe he figured it's better for him to tell his side of the story than
Nice.
to have
Did you hear that?
somebody else tell the story.
Beautiful. Maybe, so beautiful, Carolyn, I like that. Maybe he figured better for him to tell so that people hear his side of the story before somebody else says it differently. Beautiful. I love that. That's a great answer. Well, first of all, go on. Anything else? Let's remember they gave him advice, actually Zeresh gave him advice to go to the king and to make the gallows and go to the king. So they're waiting to hear what happened. He didn't have a choice. He couldn't just skip over it. So that makes very logical sense. But I like them both. I like what you said also, Carolyn. I'm going to write that down. So his side of the story, I like that. That's really good. And I think that makes a lot of sense also. When he came home despondent and filthy, he might have just been filthy, by the way, because when you barber someone and he trimmed his beard, his fingernails, whatever it was, he dressed him and he's pulling a horse, he might have just been filthy because stablemen just get dirty from taking care of the horse. That could have been as well. So here's a good answer. What does mikre mean? What is that word? Karahu. So kara means it happened, but a mikra means it happened by chance. So one way of understanding it is he said, oh no, it was coincidental, he played it down. It was his misfortune to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Had he not come to the king early in the morning, a king would have had somebody else do it. And he assured them that the king still loved him, and he didn't have a chance to discuss the hanging because the king was so preoccupied with Mordechai, but he's sure the king would agree to hang Mordechai once he paid him back for, remember he honored him. Why? Because he had revealed the plot. Once he paid him back, he doesn't care about him anymore. I'm sure tomorrow I'll go to the king. He's going to agree to hang him. I don't know why he thought that. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's one way. Alternatively, he proudly interpreted that it's something karahu, that happened to him, meaning it showed his greatness and importance, that the king was in a dilemma how to reward Mordechai. All night he couldn't sleep. No one was able to advise him. He comes in, the king says, can you give me advice? He gives him advice. The king loves it immediately. And Mordechai's action was of such value to the king that his coveted reward, Haman's suggestion, let me say it better. Haman's suggestion was so coveted by the king that he says, right away, you should do it, It's such a great idea. I got to give it to the best man in the kingdom to bring Mordechai around. I'm giving it to you. So, and again, he says, undoubtedly, now that the king no longer owes Mordechai anything, he will grant my wish and hang him. So in either way, whether it's incidental or that he was picked on purpose because he's close to the king, either way, Haman comes out with, oh, but everything's going to be fine. But that's when things turn on their heel, as however you say it, because his Chachamim and Zeresh say, Zera Yudi Mordechai, if Mordechai is from the seed of the Jews, meaning a Jewish person, if he's a descendant of the Jews, Asher hachilota linpol lefanav, you have begun to fall, or you have begun to not be able to prevail against them. That word linpol, to fall, I just want to remind you, was also used. The king said that to Haman, al tapel davar, don't drop anything from what you said you would do. Don't think you can get around it by just using the horse or just the garments. So the same word is being used. He's already falling in his esteem. He's falling in his honor when he led Mordechai around. And the Zeresh and his friends are picking up on this and saying, you have started to fall, you will not be able to conquer him. Lo tuchalo. By the way, this word, you will not be able to prevail, is used by Yaakov when he's not able to prevail against the angel. Remember when he wrestled? So that's the same word, meaning you can't beat him. You will not be able to conquer him. Remember, that's what happened with Yaakov. He couldn't actually beat the angels. Remember that? Also, the angel wasn't able to beat him. V'lo yuchalo, he wasn't able to. He didn't manage to. Why? Instead, nafol tipol lefanav, you're actually going to fall in front of him. So, I don't know if I said this before, but for a long, yes, Robert, go.
Verse 5, 14.
14?
He spoke to, Haman spoke to his wife and all his friends, and they gave him the advice about making the gallows.
Yep.
But he's also going to come back to the same group and tell them what happens. This is how your advice worked out, and look what's happening to me now.
Yeah, in fact, that's why it says that, remember, he asked Zeresh first and then his friends, but first his friends answered and then Zeresh. It's flipped. Because Zeresh saw that the last time she gave him advice, it didn't go so well. So she waited until the friends. I mean, it's an interesting point that it's flipped, the order, which Felice noticed that she's in there. If you look at verse 13, Haman related to Zeresh, his wife, to all his friends, and the wise people and Zeresh answered him. She's like, maybe I shouldn't say anything this time. Last time, my advice didn't work out so well. It didn't change, but it didn't get done. But here's the thing, his friends already knew that he was Mordechai HaYehudi. So why are they saying now that if he's from the Jewish people, you're not going to be able to conquer him? So here's a beautiful thought that I thought of once, but this was solidified and supported. So I said, well, 1 second, here it says, if you've begun to fall, that's it, your time is up. If you're able to do things, like hang him on the gallows, that shows that God basically is angry with the Jews and allowing it to happen. But if you've started to fall in honor, that's showing that God is happy with the Jews and they've done tshuva, let's say. So here was an interesting and beautiful thought. Have you heard the Jews compared to stars in the sky and to the dust of the earth? Have you ever heard those terms? The Jews will be the Abraham, your descendants. We just had it in the Parsha. Your descendants will be like the stars in the sky. Oh, actually, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, meaning in quantity. Everybody with me? You've heard that? Yes? Does that sound familiar? So listen to this beautiful explanation. When God is happy with the Jews, they're like the stars in the sky, and they vanquish. When God's not happy with the Jews, they're like the dust of the earth, and people trample on them and scattered. No, that's beautiful. Ruby adds, and scattered. Oh my God, that fits so beautifully. Oh my goodness, I have goosebumps. That is beautiful. They're like stars aren't scattered, but the earth gets scattered. Oh, gorgeous. That is like the best explanation I've ever heard for being stars and earth. When God's happy with us, so what the Chachamim and Zeresh saw was that originally they were like the dust of the earth. Why? Because there's a decree and edict to kill them. Mordechai's not bowing down to Haman. He doesn't know about Esther yet, so he can't say that. He doesn't know Esther's a Jew. So everything seems great. Haman is second only to King Ahasuerus. Everything's awesome. Now they see you've tried, and Mordechai is actually beating you at your own game. And the king, respects him and loves him. And sorry, bud, but nothing you have is going to work. Odam medabrim imo, they're just talking with him. The saris is eunuchs, but it could be the chamber people, like his servants. Higiu, they came. Vayaphilu laviat Haman, they hastened to bring Haman. El hamishter sharasta Esther, to the second feast that Esther made. Remember that story, right? We're in between the two. So the question is, why quickly? So one Midrash says the reason that God made it happen, that it was quickly, so Haman wouldn't have time to take down the gallows. What were you saying, Ruby? What did you want? Okay, to take down the gallows, because he doesn't, if Mordechai is being given so much honor for the king, maybe he shouldn't come to him with the question about why do you have a gallows in your backyard? And actually, then it remains standing so that he and his 10 sons could be killed and hung on the gallows. So, yeah. So there's a lot of intrigue and things happening in the background. What, Ruby? What? Tell me.
A lot of intrigue. But just looking at this chapter 6 by itself, I would not have.
Never, right? You wouldn't have known, right? This delving in is fantastic. I'm so enjoying. Okay, it's not great. I mean, it's all against Jews, pretty much. But not now. The tide is turning. And thank God. I just want to hold on to that, considering how hard it is in Israel. I mean, there's so much. There were missiles, rockets. There's a picture of a rocket that fell on a car in Ra'anana. That's where I'm from, is from Ra'anana. It's just really scary. So I'm, hoping for that tide to be turned. Halavai, I wish. But yes, I think Ruby said it well. If I just read Perek Shesh, Perek Vav, 6 Perek, I wouldn't have known all that. But it's only when you sit and you really delve into it. And it's really, I have to say, like, when we're going to hear Megillat Esther read on Purim, I just feel like it's going to carry more with it for us. We're always going to feel like it has more. Okay. My friends, next Wednesday at this time, I will, Be'ezrat Hashem, be at JFK Airport waiting for my trip to Israel at this time. Yep, it's at 2:30 my flight, so I will not be able to teach. And I won't be able to teach when I'm in Israel. It's just going to be too hard for me. So, but in 2 weeks, hard to believe, but 2 weeks from, I'll be coming back Tuesday morning before Thanksgiving. So Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving, I plan on teaching. And we will learn Perek Zayin. We will learn the 7th chapter. Yes. Thank you, Robert. And the people from Rochester who are usually on are at a lunch and learn in their shul. So they weren't able to come. I hope they'll be able to come back.
On the 27th.
The 27th, Bezrat Hashem, barring unforeseen circumstances.
You'll be back.
I will be back on Tuesday, and I plan to teach on Wednesday. Please come. I would love it if you would come.
Thank you.
And we'll learn chapter 7, then 8, 9, and then we'll pick something else. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.